Hello again, Steve here, and with a little chat on improving the quality of our life experiences. Now, there's a tendency that I certainly have, and maybe you share this at times, which is to say, something shouldn't be like that. I shouldn't be like this. They shouldn't be like that. He shouldn't be, she shouldn't be. And that book I went through a while back, Loving What Is by Byron Katie, there's basically, I love the first two questions. She has basically four questions. The first two are basically, are you sure of that? Are you really sure of that? Along that line. So if I'm to say, the economy shouldn't be the way it is, well, am I sure of that? Am I really sure of that? I really start to think about it by equation, right? Everything that's happening, by equation, perhaps it should be like that. In fact, that is the equation of all the inputs, right? That's the natural thing that is. And speaking along the lines of what Nietzsche was getting at, or maybe it was Stefan Molyneux, I'm not sure, or the both of them, about this reason equals virtue equals happiness, right? We reason it through, look at what's actually going on, realize that what is the effect of all the inputs. Then by reason deduction, it actually should be like that. Which equals virtue. Virtue is like the truth, right? There's this big relaxing feeling that comes over, which to me feels like happiness. It's like, so what? Okay, in the process might want to help out, help people's transition through all this. For example, just a few things, right? A good example is what's happening in Greece. That's no accident. People were wanting to, just get free money. And if you look at the numbers, more than half the people there are on unemployed or on pensions or some sort of welfare. Well, and then of eligible people. And there's, babies and elderly and so on. There's only a minority who's working, contributing. Well, how sustainable is that, right? So by that equation, it should end up in bankruptcy. I mean, if we ran our households like that, spending more than we earn and taking loans and loans and loans and loans and balloons, eventually it's like, I can't pay that anymore. So it should, so it has to basically crumble. There'll be some pain, but it'll have to crumble at some point. And when people live this delusion of just free everything, this socialism, this entitlement mentality, these symptoms grow in, like I call it almost, social Marxism, social communism, social collectivism. It's this dehumanizing tendency that the collective, that us, that Canada, we, the Canadians, the people, the Americans, or whatever, did this or did that. We won the World Hockey Series. Meanwhile, I sat on my chub eating whatever. I didn't win anything. But that's the tendency that we have, right? Human beings have, is to be this, to go for this collective somehow. It seems easier than taking personal responsibility, I guess. But it's part of the equation, right? So we see things that come out of that, with that tendency to be collective. So now if there's this collective, there's that collective, and that collective. And we see that happening more and more. But it should be like that, because that has been the inputs have added up to that. I'm saying, I don't know if this is for sure, but this is what seems right. This is what the reasoning leads to, what truth it leads to. And it leads to kind of relaxation feeling. Things like, social collectivism, this thing, the patriarchy that people are talking about, and this, radical sexist feminism that's going on, and this, masculine things that are going on, the racism, the whole racism, the race baiting, the white shaming, which is basically racism, um, and even the environmentalism, of course, and even the Pope, in attempts to salvage the Catholic Church. By the looks of it, I could be wrong on this, is just jumping on that bandwagon about capitalism bad, environmentalism good, and to me it all just leads to divide and conquer, and that's why it will fail, because divide and conquer is not sustainable, right? And at the end of the day, I think all the shoulds, or all the inputs rather, have been, a lot of that has been put together by some very bright people, probably, or interests anyways, interests within people, whether it's a conscious thing or it's more of like a drive, a human drive, to steal from people, right? If you put a bunch of stuff in people's heads and shake them up, as they do in public schools, essentially, distract people from their nature, especially children wanting to play. Sit. If you don't sit, we'll drug your head until you do sit. This is a process of indoctrination, so that those people can be stolen from. That's as simple as I see it. That's the reasoning, right? Which leads to what's seen as more truthful. But at the end of the day, it's kind of like a so what. Because at the end of the day, it's no amount of telling people this really, unless we're already speaking to the converted. Almost no amount of mentioning this registers almost, because people being where they are, I think, feel that somehow they're wrong, So it'll get corrected. I mean, there was no amount of telling the Greek people that if you keep on going and taking your welfare and taking your pensions, which are just basically deferring debt to your grandchildren, that not only are you're going to run out of that money someday, but your grandchildren are going to have a lot of load to carry. No amount of telling them that would do any good, because they'd run you out of town and call you a right-wing zealot or something. But when it all comes crashing down, people will say things like, "Wow, I could never imagine that," or it's all some conspiracy. But numbers don't lie. Reasoning doesn't lie, for the most part, if it's correctly reasoned. And so I would say that for the most part, we got to get on with our lives. There's this tendency that I have sometimes to get downtrodden by all these perceived problems, right? At the end of the day, I'm not going to solve everybody's problems. In that book, Byron Katie, I think it was her anyways, she talked about how she does this counseling, right? And she tells people, look, there's basically 3 problems in the world. There's your problems, there's other people's problems, and there's God's problems. Now, I'm not saying I focus on, or I'm going to put any sort of a definition on what God is, but it's whatever is out there, right, that we didn't build. But focus on number 1, right? Focus on number 1. Focus on, or at least look for the solutions for number 1. Because no amount of if that's continually ignored, then there's not much help that we can do for this, right? And certainly we're not going to do any work for this. So I think we kind of got to let it roll, right? Let it roll. The inputs are already there. The equation has been forced, or has been building, right? So then the results have to be there. And once that crash takes place, there's like a reorganization. People wake up. It's like a renaissance that takes place. Some people go, holy shit, now I see it, right? Because hindsight's always 20/20. And then build it up again on our never-ending march to a freer concept of self, a greater awareness of self, less superstition, more reasoning, more empiricism, more virtue, and more happiness. So, let it roll, baby. Let it roll. And just be aware of the rolling. Talk about it if you can. Talk about it to yourself, your kids, and so on. But at the end of the day, gotta be able to have a good night's sleep, right? It's my input anyway. Take care, everyone. Steve here again.